For 6 months, they thought I was just another scared foster kid. They never knew I was sent there to end them. I've carried their secrets ever since, and tonight I'm finally telling what really happened. I was only 18, but CPS sent me into the lion's den pretending to be a broken 12-year-old foster kid. My assignment? Go undercover in the Ericksons' home, the same home where 3 foster children had died in accidents no one could ever quite explain. On my very first night, Mrs. Erickson shoved me into their basement, pointed at a bucket in the corner, and told me I could earn real bathroom privileges and decent food if I behaved. It didn't take long to see why none of those kids survived long enough to testify. Mr. Erickson would sit on the basement steps while his wife was out, casually detailing, almost reliving, how each of those children died. Down the stairs. Cleaning fluid. The river. Always accidents. Always when no one was paying attention. When I first showed up, I looked the part. Black eye painted on with makeup. Hair greasy. A garbage bag of thrift store clothes stinking faintly of cigarette smoke. My caseworker, Elizabeth, did all the talking at the door while I hunched behind her like a scared stray. Mrs. Erickson's warm welcome lasted about 2 seconds, just long enough for her to clock the fake bruises, the cheap sneakers, and my silence. Then her smile snapped right off her face. She told Elizabeth to just leave the paperwork on the porch. Elizabeth, still professional, reminded her she'd need to show me my room and go over house rules. That's when Mrs. Erickson rolled her eyes and said she knew the drill. She dealt with plenty of kids like me. When Elizabeth turned to say goodbye, Mrs. Erickson blocked her with an outstretched bottle of hand sanitizer, pumping it aggressively while explaining how kids from the system were full of diseases. I gave my best timid little voice, "Where do I?" She cut me off with a laugh that had no humor. "Don't try the sweet innocent act on me. I've seen it all." She snatched my garbage bag like it was contaminated and hauled it inside. Mr. Erickson came out of the kitchen, eyeing me like he was inspecting livestock. "Another runner?" he asked. "Probably," she said, judging by the black eye. My bag hit the floor near a basement door. She nudged it toward me with her foot. "Your room's downstairs. Not a bedroom, a basement." The bare bulb flickered to life, lighting up a stained mattress on concrete. "Bathroom's upstairs, but that's for family," she said. "You'll make do with the bucket." She pointed out the lock on the outside of the door, claiming it was for my safety, because foster kids apparently sleepwalk into danger. The teddy bear under my arm, the one I'd fought to keep, recorded everything through its hidden camera. Dinner that night was a performance. The Ericksons ate roast at the table while I sat on the kitchen floor. Mrs. Erickson tossed me a crust of bread and a plastic cup of water without even looking at me. Earn better food with good behavior. Bethany, their teenage daughter, snickered. The last one took 3 weeks to get peanut butter. When I reached for the bread, Mr. Erickson smacked my hand so hard it stung. "Say please," he said coldly. "Just because you were raised like an animal doesn't mean you act like one here. I'd been warned it would be bad." The files painted a grim picture. But living it, breathing it, was a whole different kind of nightmare. On the 3rd day, Mrs. Erickson decided I smelled. She dragged me outside, stripped me down, and blasted me with freezing water from a garden hose while her kids watched from the window. She smiled for the neighbors. "These kids come from filthy places, can't have them contaminating our shower." By day 5, she was withholding food for infractions. Looking at her kids? No breakfast. Speaking without permission? No lunch. I was lightheaded most of the day, my performance as a starving child becoming painfully real. But Mr. Erickson, he was something else. He'd sit on the basement stairs with a knife in hand, casually cleaning his nails while he whispered about the other kids' accidents. I could smell the metallic tang of fear in my own breath. On day 7, I slipped a granola bar into my pillowcase. One Bethany had actually smuggled to me, but Mrs. Erickson found it. She dragged me up the stairs by my hair, my teddy bear tumbling behind us. She kept me standing in the kitchen corner for 6 hours, slamming pots next to my head whenever I swayed. When I finally collapsed, Mr. Erickson bent down and hissed, "3 more kids are coming next month. More checks. You'll be gone by then. One way or another." That's when I heard sirens. 2 police cars. A CPS van. My handler's voice crackled in my earpiece. "Hold position." Mrs. Erickson's face went pale. Mr. Erickson dropped his knife, kicking it under the fridge. They scrambled to clean the counters, wipe away any visible filth. The doorbell rang, followed by hard knocking. Mrs. Erickson pasted on her sugary smile and opened it to Detective Martinez, 2 uniformed officers, and Sarah Chen from CPS. Sarah didn't so much as glance at me, keeping her face professional. Mrs. Erickson gushed about misunderstandings and 15 years of dedicated foster parenting. Mr. Erickson nodded along like he was at a church meeting. Then Martinez's eyes landed on me, a small, filthy figure on the floor, red marks on my arms, flinching whenever Mr. Erickson moved. His jaw tightened. Sarah asked to see my room. Mrs. Erickson hesitated, fumbling for excuses about structure and safety locks as they headed toward the basement. The officers went down first. One muttered a curse at the sight of the bucket. Sarah photographed everything. Meanwhile, Martinez crouched next to me. "You hurt?" he asked quietly. I shook my head, staying in character. His gaze lingered on the teddy bear for a second before he stood. Bethany and her little brother appeared in the doorway, still holding ice cream bowls. Her spoon trembled in her hand. When Sarah asked Mrs. Erickson where I ate my meals, she gestured vaguely at the table. Bethany's eyes widened, that tiny flicker of truth Martinez noticed instantly. He invited her to talk in the living room. Mrs. Erickson moved to stop her, but an officer blocked the way. Bethany looked at me, then followed the detective. Mr. Erickson's mask cracked. He started shouting about false reports and lawsuits. His voice got louder until officers stepped in. Through the doorway, I could see Bethany speaking to Martinez, her hands twisting nervously. Whatever she said made his face darken. Mrs. Erickson tried to slip away, babbling about paperwork that would clear everything up, but Sarah Chen kept her in the kitchen. Then the basement door opened again. An officer emerged with my garbage bag. Another followed with evidence bags. Mrs. Erickson's idea of hospitality? Let's just say a cardboard box under a freeway overpass would have been an upgrade. At least cardboard doesn't come with a torture bucket and ice-cold hose showers. Through the clear evidence bags I could see the bucket, photographed, tagged. They'd found more too. Deep scratch marks along the doorframe. Dark stains on the concrete that looked an awful lot like dried blood. Mr. Erickson's shouting grew louder, the kind of volume that's more for himself than anyone listening. He insisted the evidence was planted. Claimed I'd done it all myself. They all do, he barked. Self-harm for sympathy, I've seen it 100 times. Mrs. Erickson chimed in right on cue, nodding furiously and throwing in her own accusations about my manipulative behavior. Then Detective Martinez came back into the kitchen, Bethany trailing behind him, eyes fixed on the floor. She wouldn't look at her parents. Not once. His voice was calm but final. I'd be going for a medical exam and an emergency placement. The investigation would continue. The Ericksons could expect further contact. And that's when Mrs. Erickson's mask finally shattered. She jabbed a finger at me, screaming about how I'd destroyed her family. Called me ungrateful, worthless, trash that bit the hand that fed it. Do you have any idea how lucky you are? She spat. Other foster kids have it worse. At least I gave you a roof and food. Sarah Chen took my arm, guiding me up, my teddy bear clutched tight against my chest. I made sure its camera caught every second of Mrs. Erickson's unraveling. Mr. Erickson tried one last time to block us at the door, demanding supervisors, lawyers, anyone who'd listen to reason. The officers moved in, gently but firmly, to push him back. As I passed, he leaned in close enough for me to smell his coffee-stained breath. His whisper was so low no one else could hear, but my teddy bear's mic caught it, the same kind of threat he'd probably given to every kid who ever tried to talk. The evening air hit my face like a rush of freedom, even though I had to keep playing the scared 12-year-old. Neighbors were already on their lawns, phones out, recording the scene. You could almost see Mrs. Erickson's reputation crumbling in real time. Sarah helped me into the CPS van. Through the window, I caught the moment Mr. Erickson finally lost it and shoved an officer, earning himself handcuffs. Mrs. Erickson followed soon after, shrieking about lawsuits and false arrests. As we pulled away, I glanced back. Bethany was at her bedroom window, hand lifted just slightly. I couldn't tell if it was an apology or a goodbye. Her little brother stood beside her, face twisted in confusion, still convinced the foster girl had ruined everything. 3 blocks later, we pulled into an empty parking lot. Sarah turned in her seat, and for the first time that night, dropped the professional mask. She squeezed my shoulder. You did incredible, she said. Everything you got, it's going to make sure they never do this again. But it wasn't over. Not even close. We still had to make the case airtight. That meant formal statements, medical documentation, and keeping my cover story bulletproof. The Ericksons still had friends in high places, lawyers who knew how to bury ugly truths. The safe house was a bland apartment complex 20 minutes away. My handler was already inside, pacing the living room with a tablet streaming the teddy bear footage in real time. He hugged me briefly before switching right into work mode. Within the hour, the medical examiner arrived. She moved carefully, documenting every bruise and mark, separating the makeup I'd applied for my cover from the real injuries I'd collected in just a week. The handprint on my wrist. The sore spot on my scalp. The signs of dehydration from days without food. While I showered, my first real shower in days, my handler reviewed the footage. The hot water burned against raw skin, but I welcomed it. That bucket in the basement felt like it was still clinging to me. When I came out, he showed me some of the clearest clips. Mrs. Erickson's voice dripping venom. Mr. Erickson's knife glinting in the bare bulb's light. Even Bethany's conflicted glances caught on camera. Sarah returned with bad news. The Ericksons had already lawyered up. Their attorney, an old family friend, had helped them survive previous investigations. Their plan was predictable, paint me as a troubled teen who staged the abuse for attention. Their own children would back them up. Without those recordings, it would just be my word against theirs. We spent the night building my official statement. It had to match what a traumatized 12-year-old could realistically remember. Too perfect would look scripted. Too messy would leave holes their lawyer could exploit. I practiced stammering, shaking, letting tears come exactly where they'd land hardest. Morning hit and the lawyer hit back. He filed an emergency motion claiming CPS had violated protocol. Said the basement was a therapeutic space for kids with behavioral issues. That the lock was for safety. That the bucket was a temporary fix while plumbing was being repaired. My handler slammed his fist on the table when he heard it. 3 dead kids in 5 years, each one spun into a tragic accident by the same man. The system was protecting their killers with loopholes big enough to drive a truck through. Sarah worked with Detective Martinez to strengthen the case. Bethany's testimony was key, but her parents were already reeling her back in. By noon, the news vans were at the Ericksons' house. Their lawyer stood on the lawn, telling reporters this was all the work of a vindictive foster child and an overzealous CPS team. Mrs. Erickson went on the morning talk shows in full tearful mode, clutching photos of smiling foster kids, conveniently excluding the 3 who'd died. She was good. Scary good. Public opinion started shifting in her favor. That's when my handler said, "We need more. The recordings aren't enough, not with this lawyer." So they set up a formal video deposition. I stayed in character as the scared 12-year-old, explaining in detail about the bucket, the basement, the hunger. I held the teddy bear close, calling it my only comfort. Halfway through, the Ericksons' lawyer barged in, demanding to cross-examine me. Security had to pull him out, but his cold, calculated stare rattled me for real. On camera you could see me flinch, which ironically my handler said only helped. Real victims don't hold it together perfectly. That night Martinez came by with worse news. The Ericksons had hired a private investigator to dig into my background. If they found out I wasn't 12, the whole operation could blow up. We fast-tracked everything. Sarah filed emergency paperwork to secure the evidence. Tech experts began authenticating the teddy bear's recordings so they'd hold up in court. Every hour counted. Then at 2 a.m. the call came in. Bethany, whispering into the CPS hotline. She'd run to a friend's house. Her parents had threatened to send her away if she testified. She was terrified they'd do to her what they'd done to the others. Martinez picked her up personally. At the station she broke. Told us about years of watching her parents abuse foster kids. Sneaking them food. Seeing her father shove a boy down the basement stairs. Watching her mother force a girl to swallow cleaning chemicals. The drowning, a camping trip no foster kid should have been on. By the next morning Mrs. Erickson was being led out of a TV studio in full makeup and pearls, handcuffed for all of local news to see. Mr. Erickson didn't get his big moment on camera. He was caught at the state border with a car full of shredded documents. Their lawyer suddenly rediscovered his ethical obligations and quit. The private investigator came up empty on my identity. And survivor after survivor came forward, their voices finally rising above the fear. And Bethany? I still wonder, what was it that finally pushed her to dial that number at 2 a.m.? What moment made her decide she couldn't stay silent anymore? Through every public appearance I stayed deep in character, the wide-eyed, traumatized 12-year-old they thought they'd broken. Even at the Ericksons' bail hearing I sat right in the front row, teddy bear in my lap, letting them see the child they'd tried to destroy. When Mrs. Erickson's eyes locked with mine, her fake composure shattered for a split second, pure venom flashing across her face. The judge noticed. Bail was denied. The risk of them running, the danger they posed, too great. As they were escorted out, Mr. Erickson looked over his shoulder one last time. No words, just an expression that promised, if he ever got free I'd regret it. I hugged my bear tighter, making sure its camera caught that look for the permanent record. Sarah Chin never stopped moving. She worked like someone who knew time was the enemy. The forensic team came back with a bombshell DNA in the basement from all 3 foster kids who'd died in that house, proving the Ericksons had lied about never keeping them there. Financial records showed they'd pocketed over $500,000 in foster care payments, while spending almost nothing on the kids themselves. My handler worried about me. Pretending to be a victim is one thing, living through real abuse while doing it is another. He arranged therapy with someone who specialized in undercover trauma. For the first time I could drop the voice, drop the posture, and just be me. 2 weeks in, we hit a wall. The Ericksons' new lawyer filed motions accusing CPS of entrapment, claiming I was planted there to fabricate a case. If he won, every shred of evidence could be tossed. My handler barely slept, working on counter-arguments that would protect both the case and the undercover program. Then Martinez found something in the shredded papers Mr. Erickson had tried to destroy. Pieced back together, they revealed a chilling network, foster parents sharing tips on discipline and dodging CPS oversight. It was too big to tackle without blowing my cover, so Martinez passed it to the feds. Our focus stayed on the Ericksons. Their other foster kids were removed immediately. Sarah oversaw every placement, making sure each one went to families that passed the most thorough vetting you can imagine. Some kids needed therapy. Bethany's little brother, he didn't fully understand the danger he'd been in. Bethany herself chose protective custody. Her testimony had made her a target for the Erickson supporters, people convinced the couple were martyrs being persecuted. She stayed with Sarah, slowly unlearning years of brainwashing. Every public appearance of mine was choreographed down to the smallest detail. We couldn't risk an investigator spotting something that didn't fit the role. Every interview, every court session, I had to be that scared little girl, even while delivering the truth. The forensic evidence piled high. The bucket tested positive for waste from multiple children. The mattress fibers told their own story. Scratch marks on the walls, fingerprints, blood traces, all painting the same picture. Then Mrs. Erickson's past came out. Years ago she'd worked at a group home where 3 children died under accidental circumstances. Each one disturbingly similar to our case. She'd been honing her methods for decades, learning exactly how far she could push without leaving proof, until now. Mr. Erickson's history was no cleaner. Former co-workers described him as vindictive, controlling, obsessed with dominance. His seized knife collection? Several blades matched wounds found on the dead foster children. 3 weeks after the arrest, the defense pulled a stunt. They brought in a former foster kid to testify the Ericksons had saved him. We suspected bribes or coaching but couldn't prove it, until Martinez traced bank transfers from their lawyer to the witness's account. We made the call to release select clips from the teddy bear. Not everything, just enough to show their cruelty was real. The footage broke the witness's story apart. Under cross-examination, he admitted they'd paid him to lie. His real memories matched the abuse pattern exactly. As trial loomed, I started feeling the weight of leaving my cover behind. I'd been this child for so long that stepping back into my real age felt strange, even dangerous. My handler noticed the signs. He set up a gradual transition, private spaces where I could be myself, public spaces where I stayed in character. The therapist worked on separating her from me, the small, terrified girl from the trained operative who had built her. Sarah became a lifeline. We'd talk for hours about the case, not just from the victim's point of view but as professionals, analyzing the psychology, the system failures, the cracks abusers crawled through. Then came the grand jury indictment, 3 counts of murder, dozens of abuse charges, fraud, conspiracy. Life in prison on the table. The prosecutor refused any plea deal that didn't involve full accountability. Bethany's bravery sparked a wave. Former foster kids all over the state came forward with stories about the Ericksons and others like them. My teddy bears recordings had set something bigger in motion. But preparing for trial meant reliving every second. Prosecutors drilled me in character for the stand, because the defense's best hope was exposing me as an adult. My handler had contingency plans in case my cover blew, but we all knew my testimony was the nail in their coffin. Then, 6 weeks after my first night in that basement, word came, Mr. Erickson had suffered a heart attack in custody. His lawyer tried spinning it into sympathy, a poor, innocent man killed by false accusations. But his medical history showed years of neglect, arrogance that had finally caught up with him. And Mrs. Erickson? She turned on him instantly, offering to sell him out for a lighter sentence. The prosecutor let her talk but promised nothing. She'd spent decades perfecting her cruelty, and she'd sacrifice anyone, even her husband, if it meant saving herself. The trial loomed ahead like a black cloud you can't outrun. Every shred of evidence had been sorted, logged, and locked in place. Every witness was rehearsed and ready. Somewhere in an evidence locker sat my teddy bear, its glassy camera eye lifeless now, but the truth it had seen and recorded was preserved forever. Those silent hours in the basement were about to speak louder than any human voice. My last prep session was all about holding steady under fire. The defense would come for me, try to crack my cover, force me into admitting I wasn't 12, that I'd been planted. I drilled breathing exercises, tiny body language cues, every microscopic detail that sold the illusion of a scared foster kid instead of an 18-year-old operative. Then Sarah Chen brought in something that steeled our resolve. 2 of the 3 dead foster kids still had living relatives, families who'd been searching for years, lied to at every turn by the Ericksons. They would finally hear the truth. Finally see justice. The night before trial, my handler and I went through everything one last time. The weight was crushing. 3 murdered children. Countless others scarred. The foster care system itself needing reform. And it all rested on me staying in character. Dawn came and I became her one last time, the small, frightened 12-year-old clutching her bear. The makeup artist added those subtle touches that shaved 6 years off my face. My heart pounded, but my expression stayed meek. We entered the courthouse through a back entrance. My handler melted into the gallery while Sarah guided me to the witness waiting room. I peeked through a narrow window as the Ericksons shuffled in wearing orange jumpsuits. Mrs. Erickson's suburban perfection had rotted away, hollow cheeks, sunken eyes. Mr. Erickson, once so imposing, looked diminished, a shadow of his blustering self. They didn't even glance at each other. The prosecutor called me first. I walked to the stand on deliberately unsteady legs, clutching my teddy bear like it was the only thing tethering me to safety. My voice stayed small as I answered questions about who I was and how I came to live with the Ericksons. When we reached the basement, I held the bear tighter. The prosecutor asked to play clips from the recordings. The judge agreed, despite the defense's protest. Mrs. Erickson's voice filled the courtroom, mocking, cruel, explaining her bucket system like it was policy. I saw jurors flinch. Then came the cross-examination. The defense attorney approached like a friendly uncle, but every question had teeth. He probed for cracks, background details, inconsistencies. I gave him stammers, tears, the tremble of someone still afraid. When he suggested I'd misunderstood discipline, I described in quiet detail the moldy bread, the icy hose, the stench of the bucket. He tried to catch me with the makeup bruises from day one. I told him I'd used fake marks to hide the real ones, hoping someone would notice. The jury seemed to believe it. Bethany testified next. She didn't look at her parents. Her hands shook as she took the oath, then she told the court about years of screams from the basement, bloody towels, threats that kept her silent. The defense painted her as a bitter, rebellious teen. She didn't break. Martinez laid out the physical evidence, DNA from dead children in the basement, stolen foster care funds, a knife set with traces of blood. The defense's paid witness folded under cross-examination, admitting the bribe and revealing his real experience matched ours. Then Mrs. Erickson took the stand, against her lawyer's advice. She spun wild explanations, the bucket was for storm emergencies, the lock was to stop sleepwalking accidents. The prosecutor shredded her story piece by piece, playing footage of her laughing while spraying me with freezing water, showing receipts for jewelry and vacations bought with foster funds. Her temper slipped, and the jurors saw the woman she really was. Mr. Erickson stayed silent, staring ahead as victim after victim took the stand. The medical examiner's testimony crushed any lingering doubt, bruises consistent with being held underwater, throat injuries from force-feeding chemicals, defensive wounds before a fatal fall. Closing arguments tied it all together. The prosecutor lifted my teddy bear, calling it, the eyes and ears that never looked away. The defense tried to spin a story of conspiracy and overreach, but it felt hollow in the face of everything we'd shown. The jury was out for only 4 hours. I waited in a secure room, my handler pacing, Sarah making placement calls for the kids we'd saved. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, 3 murders, dozens of abuse charges, fraud, conspiracy, Mrs. Erickson sobbed like a bad actress. Mr. Erickson didn't blink. 2 weeks later, the judge sentenced them to 3 consecutive life terms, plus years for everything else. They would die in prison. The story made local headlines but never went national. That suited me fine. The rest of their network was being dismantled, though my name never surfaced. My teddy bear went into permanent evidence storage. My handler eased me back into myself, out of the child's body language, voice, and vulnerability. The therapist helped separate her from me so I wouldn't lose myself in the role. Sarah invited me to meet some of the kids we'd rescued. Seeing them in real homes, safe and smiling, was worth every scar. A few recognized me despite the difference in age. They didn't need an explanation, they just knew. Bethany reached out too. We met in a coffee shop near her community college. She apologized for not speaking up sooner. I told her she'd been braver than most adults I'd met. CPS overhauled its undercover program after my case, better safety nets, faster extraction protocols. My mission became the template. And though my teddy bear was silent now, the truth it carried had changed everything. 6 months after the verdict, word came quietly: Mr. Erickson was dead. Officially, heart failure. Unofficially, the whispers from inside said it was the kind of justice prison reserves for child killers. Mrs. Erickson, meanwhile, was still breathing, locked away in solitary, not out of mercy, but because even hardened inmates wouldn't tolerate what she'd done. I went back to college. Social work. I sat in lecture halls among classmates who knew me only as a dedicated student passionate about protecting kids, not as the undercover operative who'd lived through hell to put 2 people behind bars. The case shaped me, but it didn't own me. On the anniversary of the verdict, the families of the 3 murdered foster children held a memorial. I stood in the back silent, as their names were spoken, their faces remembered, their deaths finally acknowledged as murders, not tragic accidents. It wasn't closure for me, but for them it was a long-delayed truth. Other survivors found me over time. We built an informal network, swapping resources, sharing therapists' numbers, marking small victories in healing. Different lives, same scars. We didn't need to explain the bond. The case sparked change. The foster care system in our state tightened inspections, screened homes more thoroughly, and actually checked in with kids. It wasn't perfect, no system ever is, but it was progress written in hard lessons. My last session with the undercover therapist was about integration. The 12-year-old victim I'd pretended to be, she was still in there. But she wasn't me anymore. I'd learned to separate the performance from the person. The instincts that kept me alive in that basement had become part of my strength. I kept only one photo from the mission, not evidence, not the Ericksons, but the children we'd rescued. Smiling in safe homes. Free. That's why people like me exist, to bridge the gap between the most vulnerable and the justice they deserve. Eventually, the Erickson house sold. The basement was remodeled, painted, turned into just another part of a suburban home. If you drove by today, you'd see nothing unusual. But survivors remember. Some walls never forget, even when the paint is new. With the case closed, I began preparing for my next assignment. I knew now exactly what it cost to go undercover and why it mattered. Until the system could protect every child, operatives like me would have to be the thin line between predator and prey. My handler retired soon after. This had been his last case. He'd saved more children than he could count, but this one, it had taken a piece of him. We kept in touch, bound by the kind of understanding only 2 people who've lived in lies for the sake of truth could share. The teddy bear, my silent witness, now rests in an evidence archive, its lens dark, its job finished. But its recordings live on, proof that evil can be confronted and beaten. The children it helped save are growing up safe. For that little bear, it was the perfect ending. And for me? Well, that's just one story in a much bigger fight. If you enjoyed today's drama, just imagine what's waiting in the next one. Hit like, subscribe, and let's go find the next train wreck together. Thanks for watching.